Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Children and Youth Program Grants Info Session. I'm just going to give a minute here for everyone to log on, and then we will get started. Okay, I see the live number has stopped growing, so we will go ahead and jump into the presentation. Again, welcome to the Children and Youth Program Grants Info Session. Before I do anything else, I want to let you know that captions are available on this call. If you would like to turn on captions, you can do so by going to the More button in the top bar. It may also look like 3 dots, depending on your view. And from there, you can go to Language and Speech, and then turn on live captions. If you do need live captions, that's pretty important, so I wanted to start there. Also pretty important, my name is Aaliyah Morochak. I am the Children and Youth Program Officer here at the Foundation. And although we aren't gathered in person today, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. As you continue throughout your day, I invite you to reflect on the land that supports your participation in this call and reflect on what that means to you. I am also a little bit sick, so please bear with me. And if you can't hear me or you need me to repeat or clarify anything, I'm more than happy to do so, just ask. Lastly, we are using Teams today, which is a bit of a new modality for the Winnipeg Foundation's info sessions. And so I want to take a moment to walk through a couple features of Teams. You will be muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature, again, in that top bar. And my colleagues, Anna Maria and Roxanne, will relay your question to me during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. We have received feedback in the past that too much visual clutter in the chat can be distracting, particularly for folks that have visual impairments or folks who are neurodiverse. So I do ask that you keep the chat to a minimum and only use it to ask questions. If you find the chat bubbles popping up and those are distracting for you, you can disable those, again, by going to More and then Settings, and then Don't Show Chat Bubbles. There's also a Notes feature on Teams. I mention it because I ask that you do not use it. Notes are public, so any notes that you put in the Notes feature will be shared in real time with everyone on the call. If you would like to take notes, of course, you can do so offline. And then last but not least, this session is being recorded and will be made available on our website after we wrap up today. So you can watch it again, or you can share it with colleagues who aren't able to make it in real time. An overview of what we'll cover through the next hour. So we'll start with a brief introduction to the Winnipeg Foundation, and then move into all about the Children and Youth Program grants, including what its goals are and how it relates to our former youth serving grant programs. We'll also talk about policies, eligibility, and criteria, basically what you can and can't apply for. And then we'll move to how to apply, including a walkthrough of the application and wrapping up with that Q&A. So if you're new to the foundation, we have a pretty succinct mission, which is to support a Winnipeg where community life flourishes for all. We're just over 100 years old now, so we celebrated our 100th anniversary in 2021. And what we do is we work with charitable organizations to support their missions and visions while also working with donors to achieve their philanthropic goals. That's it in a nutshell. Today we're talking about children and youth program grants, obviously, but we do have several other granting programs that will be offered this year, including community grants, which is our broadest granting program, supporting a wide range of requests of up to $100,000. Major capital grants, which support requests over $100,000 for major capital projects. Multi-year grants, which is returning this year and supports, as the name suggests, projects over multiple years. And the summer internship program, which connects students in our youth and philanthropy high school committees with local charities to complete a summer project. If you're interested in learning more about the grants team, about our new community impact team, or about any of the grant programs that I just mentioned, we are having a grants overview information session from 10 to 12 on Tuesday, January 30th at the CCFM. My understanding is that the in-person aspect of that session is quite full. So if you aren't able to register to come in person, know that that session will also be recorded and will be shared on our website for later viewing. Okay, back to children and youth program grants, the main feature of the day. So looking at our registrants list for today, I know many of you are familiar with our former grant programs that serve children and youth, namely Nourishing Potential, Camp and Summer Program grants, and Growing Active Kids. Children and Youth Program grants is an amalgamation of these three programs with a few updates and policy changes. So it's important that we start here, as this is the foundation of the new grant program. If you're not familiar, Nourishing Potential supported requests from children and youth programs for nutritious food, kitchen equipment, nutrition education, and food handler training. Camp and Summer supported requests for fun summer programming for children and youth facing physical health or socioeconomic barriers. And if you've been around for a while, you might remember Growing Active Kids, which supported requests from youth-serving organizations to partner with other community agencies and deliver services in and around Edgeland, Gilbert Park, Plessis/Mission Gardens, and Valley Gardens, Manitoba housing communities. So what this amalgamation means is that the same amount of funding overall is still available. So we have about $1 million allocated for children and youth program grants, and that budget is the equivalent of what was available for those three programs in the past. Now you just have access to those three funds through one application. So if you have applied to Nourishing Potential, Camp and Summer, or Growing Active Kids in the past, know that those programs are no longer accepting applications, and you'll now be applying through this new Children and Youth Program grant stream. If you've never heard of those programs before and you're just looking for funding for your youth program, that's okay. Again, just know that you're applying through Children and Youth Program grants. And I do want to make a point here to note that the summer internship program that I mentioned earlier is still active. So that's another youth serving program that we have that is run through our youth and philanthropy committees. That is still active, will still be accepting applications, and is not affected by these changes. What is affected is that we now have new policies and criteria that are based on the old programs, but have a few updates. And the way that we've built these policies is to try and enable organizations to ask for what they need in one application while still meeting the trust conditions associated with the old ones. Here's where we landed. Children and Youth Program Grants awards grants of up to $25,000 to youth-serving organizations or established youth programs that serve children and youth facing systemic barriers to participation, including BIPOC and 2S LGBTQ+ youth, youth from economically disadvantaged communities, and youth with disabilities or chronic illnesses. So that's the program description for Children and Youth Program grants. It's a bit of a mouthful, so I want to break that down. This is a overview of the important aspects of that quite lengthy program description. So when I say that the program supports requests of up to $25,000, we mean that that is the maximum amount that you can request. You can request less, or you might request $25,000 and receive less. Given the competitive nature of the program, partial support is always a possibility. When I say that youth-serving organizations are eligible, I mean organizations whose missions are centered around serving youth. So those are things like after-school programs or daycares. If you're not a youth-serving organization, you may still be eligible for this grant if you have an established youth program. So if your organization's mandate is to serve the broader community, but you have a program that's been running for at least a year and serves exclusively youth, you can apply for the costs associated with that program in this granting stream. We have quite a broad definition of children and youth associated with this program. So children and youth can be anyone from newborn up to 30 years old. And likewise, the term systemic barriers to participation and the list following including. So in our program description, we say systemic barriers to participation include BIPOC and 2S LGBTQ+ youth, youth from economically disadvantaged communities, and youth with disabilities or chronic illnesses. This is by no means a complete list. Really, the program here is meant to serve youth who are underrepresented in youth programs, who might have difficulty accessing youth programs because of societal barriers. Really, it's up to the applicant in the application to demonstrate how the youth they serve face barriers and are therefore a good fit for this program. The including list in that program description is just a few examples of the types of youth you might serve. Full policies and assessment criteria are available on our website. So there's a link there that will lead you to the Children and Youth Program Grants page, and then you can find the full criteria under key documents. It will, however, give you a summary of what those eligibility criteria are. So in sum, to be eligible for a grant, you must be a registered charity or other qualified donee. Oh, excuse me. Other qualified donee is actually a pretty specific list created by the CRA. It includes things like registered amateur athletic associations and national art service organizations. The vast majority of folks who are eligible for this grant will be a registered charity and have a registered charity number with the CRA. Your project must primarily benefit the people of Winnipeg. So your organization could be located rurally, it could be national, but the project that you're applying for must primarily benefit children and youth living in Winnipeg. You're eligible to apply for one Children and Youth Program grant per calendar year. You can still apply for a community grant or another special program grant in the same calendar year, but it must be for a different project. And I find that the easiest way to think through this is just remember that the Winnipeg Foundation can't fund the same thing twice. So if you're applying for the same project in two different granting streams with the same expenses, that would be an ineligible request. If you're applying for different projects, different expenses, then you can apply to multiple granting streams. And then a note there as well that grant history is always a factor in review. So although you're able to apply for different projects across different granting streams, note that we do take a look at your grant history as part of our review. It's neither a pro nor a con. It's simply one more piece of data that we factor into your application. Final reports will be required before organizations are eligible to apply again. So this is a new program, so everyone has a clean slate, but know that going forward, you will be required to submit a final report before you're eligible to apply for another Children and Youth Program grant. And again, just a note that to be eligible, your project must serve children and youth facing systemic barriers to participation. Eligible costs include food, supplies, and equipment, fee subsidies. So if it is a registration fee that is associated with your program, you can apply to have fee subsidies provided to low-income youth. Field trips and transportation, facilitators and honorariums, food handler and first aid training that's required to run your program, and staff costs, so staff salaries. Because the Winnipeg Foundation consistently receives more requests for funding than we're able to support, and because of the spirit of and the trust conditions associated with the funds that fund this program, there are a few ineligible costs. So those are mainly costs associated with family programs. Children and youth program grants are meant specifically to serve children and youth. So for example, we've been asked in the past if I offer food hampers to community and 50% of the hampers that we hand out go to families with children, are we eligible for this grant? For this particular program, no. The Children and Youth Program grants are meant specifically for children and youth. We cannot fund costs associated with projects run in individual schools. So if you're a school division looking to run a division-wide program, you are eligible. If it's an individual school program, unfortunately, is not eligible through this program. Capital and renovations are also ineligible costs. So for example, construction or large equipment purchases. The goal of this grant is to support core programming primarily. And then lastly, costs incurred before the date of decision. So if you do apply for a Children and Youth Program grant, you'll be notified of whether your grant has been approved in and around April. So any costs that you incur before April are not eligible costs. With the exception of costs incurred before the date of decision, any of these other categories are still eligible costs under a community grants program. So that might be a better fit for your project. How to apply. Applications open today. So we are working on getting the Apply Now button up on the website, which is the first way to apply on this slide. If you go to the Children and Youth Program Grants page and access the application through the Apply Now button. The application is also available on Smart Simple. So if you follow the direct link to Smart Simple, it'll take you to your login page, and then from there, I'll walk you through the application. And note that if you are new to Smart Simple, you will have to register before you're able to access the application. So if you're a new organization, meaning new to Smart Simple, you've never submitted an application through Smart Simple before, you will have to register. And the option that you'll use is register as a Canadian charity with a CRA business number. And if you're a new contact, meaning that your organization has applied through Smart Simple before, but you as a staff member are new to the platform, then you'll have to register as a contact of an existing organization. Once you're in Smart Simple, you have a few places that you can start. So if it's been a while and you haven't submitted an application through Smart Simple in over a year, you will have to update your organization profile. Likewise, if it's been under a year, but things have changed at your organization, contacts have changed, you will also have to update your organization profile. So that's the first orange circle that you see there. It's really important that you don't skip this step because Smart Simple keeps a track of who has updated their profile and who has not. And it'll actually stop you from being able to submit your application if you haven't updated your organization profile. So that's where you're going to want to start. Once you've done that, you can find the application in that second orange circle, Open Funding Opportunities. If you're a time traveler and you've already started your application, you'll be able to go back to your application if you've saved it and you would like to complete it later. And to do that, you'll be able to access it through the In Progress line, which is that little orange arrow at the bottom of the screen. But we're going to start at the beginning, and we're going to say that you're accessing the application through Open Funding Opportunities. This is the page that you'll see. Right now, our only open funding opportunity is Children and Youth Program Grants 2024, and you'll access the application by clicking Apply. The first screen you'll see is an overview of everything we just talked about, from program description through maximum request amount, eligibility, etc. You can refresh your memory by reviewing that page and then continuing through to begin application. The application is 5 separate tabs. So you can see the first tab here is circled General, and then we have Information, Application, Budget, and Attachments. If you try and submit your application on the first tab, you'll get a long list of errors, meaning that you've missed the remaining tabs. So if you're looking for those errors and you're wondering what that is, you've forgotten to click through all tabs. The first tab is General Information. So we're looking for your primary contact information. And by primary contact, I mean the person that I would reach out to as the grant reviewer to request more information about your application. Eligibility, we've talked about a little bit already. Is your project primarily benefiting the citizens of Winnipeg? You'll be asked to confirm. And then consent to share isn't actually a eligibility requirement. If you click no, that won't stop you from being able to apply. Consent to share is just asking if we can share a summary of your project with external stakeholders, such as donors. So we'll never share private information. We won't share financial information or information about staff, just the project summary with donors so that they can gauge whether or not they would like to support your project as part of their philanthropic goals. The next tab over, so once you're complete with general, you can save, click over to information, and again, you'll just get that same summary of eligible costs, ineligible costs, program description, etc. You don't need to enter any information on this page. It's just setting you up well so that you have everything you need in front of you for when you click over to the next tab, Application. A few fields on this page. This is really the bulk of your application. We request that you give your project a name. It doesn't have to be anything formal or brilliant, just some easy way for us to identify your project in under 25 words. Requested amount, again, the maximum amount you can request is $25,000. And a project summary. So this is brief 1 to 2 sentences describing your project. You'll notice that each of these fields, if they're text boxes, have little text indicators under them, letting you know how many words you have left that you're able to submit in your application. So if you are working on your application offline in a Word document and then copying and pasting it over to SmartSimple, please do make note that you may only have so many words that can fit in each of those boxes. Oh, a note as well that the project summary that you see on this page is what I was just talking about in the consent to share section. So if you do consent to share information about your project with external stakeholders such as donors, this is most often where we pull the information from in the project summary. If you continue scrolling down in the application tab, the next question you'll be asked is to identify the number of participants that your project will serve. It's really helpful here if you're able to include unique numbers, by which I mean if you say that your project serves 5 youth and runs for 5 weeks, it's helpful to know if you mean that your project will serve the same 5 youth over the course of 5 weeks, or 5 different youth every 5 weeks, and therefore you'll be serving 25 unique youth in total. So please be as specific as you can in that text box. Next, you'll be asked to identify your start date and end date. These can be rough timelines. I don't need exact dates. A note as well that if you're familiar with our Camp and Summer Program grants, Camp and Summer Program only supported costs that were incurred over the summer months. So I do want to clarify that that is not the case for Children and Youth Program grants. Children and Youth Program grants support costs that are incurred throughout the year. And then the next question is your opportunity to share more about the youth you serve and what kind of barriers that they face that make them a good fit for this program. Scrolling down, the next question asks you to describe how your project will create an environment of inclusion and belonging where participants feel safe to take part regardless of gender, ability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or socioeconomic background. So we're looking for specific activities or steps taken here. If you have DEI policies, safe spaces policies, frameworks, or staff training that you use, that's great. I would love to hear about what they look like in practice and what the space looks like that you'll be operating your project or program in. The next question is similar, but the project implementation description that we're looking for here is just about the project generally. So this includes specific activities, timelines, and where programming will take place. And then scrolling down again, the last question in this section is describe the qualifications of the staff and volunteers working on this project. And again, we're looking specifically for qualifications that relate directly to your project. So for example, if you're running a project for Indigenous and newcomer youth, it would be helpful to know if your staff are from Indigenous or newcomer communities, if they have any training in the reconciliation space, or any other related qualifications specific to the project that you're applying for. The next tab over will take you to the budget section. The arrows here are encouraging you to save your application before you open the budget. So we often have folks who will accidentally click out of the entire application instead of just clicking out of the budget, and then they lose information. So please make sure that you save your application before you open the budget template. When you open the budget template, you'll be asked to fill in costs related specifically to your project. So we don't need your budget overall for the organization, just for your request. If you have multiple funders, so if you have funding in addition to the request that you're asking from the Winnipeg Foundation, it's helpful to know what costs are going to be allocated to foundation funding. So for example, let's say you're asking for $25,000 from the Winnipeg Foundation, and then it's not filled in the screenshot, but let's say you have another $25,000 in confirmed grants from the government. In this little note section, it's helpful if you put it either here or in the expenses section that follows this, specifically what costs you're asking for the $25,000 from the foundation versus the $25,000 that you're receiving through other grants. If you don't have that information, that's okay. It's not a requirement. It's just helpful to clarify. And then once you save your budget, you can click over to the final portion of the application, which is attachments. Attachments are not required for this application, but if you think that there's anything that it would be helpful for us to review alongside the other information you've provided, you can add that here. So you can add things like your safety policies or guidelines, letters of support, or quotes. And then you will save and submit and be complete with your application. A few timelines that it's helpful to note. So like I said, applications open today, January 16th, 2024. We're working on getting that apply now button on the website, but like I said, you can also access the application directly through Smart Simple, which is the link on a few slides back. Applications will close at 4:30 p.m. on February 16th. And do note that this is a hard deadline and that we are unable to accept late applications. So the application automatically closes at 4:30. If you're even 10 seconds late, your application will not be accepted by the system and we will be unable to review it. So it's really important that you make sure that you set up that organization profile and check all of the eligibility requirements beforehand so that you make sure you get your application in by that deadline. And then we'll be reviewing your application and reaching out if we have any questions over the next couple of months. And you'll be notified of decision, so whether or not you have received a grant and in what amount in April. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I'm more than happy to answer questions now. Again, we're going to use the chat feature. So that's the little bubble in the top bar. My coworkers, Roxanne and Anna Maria, have been reviewing the chat, and so they're going to relay the questions back to me, and I'll do my best to get you an answer. A note that if your question is quite specific to your organization, or you think that you would benefit better from a conversation, we can absolutely talk through your question one-on-one. I have contact information on the next slide. So if that's the case for you, maybe hang on to that question and we can talk more thoroughly one-on-one. If you have a general question or something that you think others would benefit from clarifying, please feel free to put it in the chat.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Good morning, everybody. So we have some questions in the chat here, and we're just going to get started right away. The first question is, how can not-for-profit organizations without charitable status apply?
Unfortunately, not-for-profit organizations without charitable status aren't eligible to apply. The Winnipeg Foundation, across all of our granting programs, only support organizations with a registered charity number or that are qualified donees. We do have some resources that we can point you towards for other funders that might be a better fit. So if you would like some information about that, we can try and connect you with a better organization. But for this particular program, you do need a registered charity number or to be a qualified donee.
So Leah, this is Roxanne. There's another question. Would projects that are supporting activities for children with their parents be eligible for this opportunity?
It depends a little bit. So obviously, if your children are quite young and they need parental support or guidance throughout the program, that would be an eligible cost. If it's a family program, if the programming that is being run is meant to benefit the family as a whole, includes activities for parents, or includes costs to support parents' participation, that's a better fit for our one-time community grants. The programming that is funded through children and youth program grants are really costs associated with serving children and youth directly.
Thank you, Aaliyah. The next question is, would a therapeutic program for youth be eligible?
Yes, great question. A therapeutic program would be eligible.
Thank you very much. And another question from me, if they run two separate programs at the same time, so one for parents and one for youth, can they apply for the youth, just the youth portion of the program?
Yes, if you want to apply just for the youth portion, that would be an eligible cost.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Just another question, a point of clarification to confirm that CAMP grants are no longer being offered.
Yes, so thank you for clarifying. Camp and Summer Program grants, as it was known, is no longer being offered. You will not be able to apply for that stream specifically. If you have costs that you have applied to Camp and Summer Program in the past for, you can now apply for those through Children and Youth Program grants.
Can organizations apply for more than one project within the Children and Youth Program grant?
We do ask that you keep it to one project per application. So just to add a point of clarification on that, if you're having difficulty choosing a project, from the foundation's perspective, there isn't really a preference beyond the eligibility criteria. We just ask that you apply for the project that is the highest priority for your organization.
Thanks, Leah. Another question. Is it possible to receive partial funding? And this question is in particular if the project is being funded partially by another funder as well.
Yes, absolutely. So if you already have partial funding secured elsewhere and you would like to apply to the Winnipeg Foundation for the remaining costs, you may absolutely do so.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Within this program, is there an allowance for any administration costs or overhead?
Yes, I believe it is about 10% that we will be able to fund for administration costs or overhead.
Another question, Leah, I think it's just another clarification question for organizations who work with kids who are 6 and under or daycares, are they eligible to apply?
Yes, daycares are eligible to apply, as well as organizations working with youth 6 and under. Our definition for this program of children and youth ranges from newborn up to 30 years old.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Are schools eligible to apply?
Individual schools are not eligible to apply. We have in the past received projects from school divisions that are applying for broad community programs that support the whole division. Those projects are still eligible. Projects within individual schools are not eligible.
Thanks, Leah. Are programs in the arts eligible if all of the other eligibility criteria are met?
Yes, absolutely. If an arts organization has an established youth program, you're more than welcome to apply.
And just another question around clarification of the application. It is one application per organization.
That is correct. One application per organization.
Sorry, Leah, just some questions popping in here, so just trying to get a hold of the
Yeah,
chat.
of course.
There was a question, is one of the eligible costs staffing costs or staff budget? Would that be eligible?
Yes, great point of clarification, because in the past that hasn't necessarily been included. But in this new program, yes, staff costs, staff salaries are an eligible expense.
And just to clarify too, they were also wondering if there was a maximum or a specific percentage that could go to staffing costs.
No, there's no maximum or specific percentage for staff costs.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Just some further clarification around schools and private schools. Are private schools eligible to apply?
Private schools as an individual school are not eligible to apply.
Okay, another question, Aaliyah. Just give me a moment. Just question is, you mentioned that the program would be youth would be 0 to 30 years old, and the question is, can we apply for a grant if a program has some individuals in that age bracket? So perhaps some folks who are in that 0 to 30 and some folks who are not.
The majority of participants would have to be in that age group, and the project costs that you're applying for would have to specifically be for that age group. So it would be a very tricky argument to make that your program is still eligible. So I would caution against that. Again, remembering that this program is specifically for children and youth, ages newborn to 30 years old.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Some questions around final reports and outstanding grants. So in this case, the question is around if you have an outstanding Nourishing Potential grant, do you have to report on that before you apply for this grant?
That's a great question. No, if you have an outstanding Nourishing Potential grant, you do not have to have submitted a final report to be eligible to apply to this grant. That being said, it is helpful information to have. So we will, if you're applying for the same program or project, we would be reviewing that final report as part of your application for subsequent years of funding. So it's useful to have, but it's not a requirement.
Thanks, Leah. There's quite a number of questions about schools. So I'm wondering if you can clarify what you meant by individual schools. What do you mean by the term individual school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated from Glen Lawn Collegiate, so I'm just going to say Glen Lawn Collegiate as the example. Glen Lawn Collegiate as an individual school would not be able to apply for a project that only serves Glen Lawn Collegiate or Glen Lawn Collegiate community. If Louis Riel School Division wanted to apply for a project that served all of Louis Riel School Division, including Glen Lawn Collegiate as part of that division, that would be an eligible project. So again, by individual school, I mean a project that serves only that school. By school division, I mean the entire division and the community associated with that division. I hope that clarifies. Again, feel free to keep asking questions if you need further clarification.
Thank you, Aaliyah. This question relates back to sort of the eligible expenses within the program. So this one specifically asks if the project has to include a nutritional / food security component, but just so that we can kind of cover all the bases here, would the grant that they're applying for have to include all those eligible expenses you mentioned, or could they just be focusing on one or two of them within the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sense kind of two questions there. The first being that no, your project does not have to include a nutrition component or a nutrition education component. That was a factor in the Nourishing Potential program that has been amalgamated into this new program. So it's an option, it's not a requirement. Likewise, all of the eligible expenses, you don't have to by any means apply for all of those categories. You are able to just apply, say, for supplies and equipment, or just apply for staff costs.
Another question for you, Aaliyah. What do we require, or what do you require in a final report?
Final reports will look quite similar to what you've seen in the past for camp and summer final reports. If you're not familiar with that, the final report will ask you to confirm how many children and youth you served, to provide a brief description of the outcome of your project or program, to tell us about any lessons that you learned and will be taking forward for future iterations of the project and program. It'll give you an opportunity to share photos or letters from kids saying how much they loved what you were able to do, or let us know anything else that we didn't specifically ask you about. And then you will be asked to provide a confirmed budget. So you'll be given an actuals column for the budget that you submitted as part of your application, and you'll be asked to confirm those expenses and revenues, or show how those expenses and revenues changed in actuality. You will not be asked to provide specific receipts or down to the dollar amounts, just dollar amounts for the general categories. And that's the final report.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Another question here. If an organization has applied for example, a summer jobs grant through the government, but are waiting on the decision, can they still apply for staff expenses with this information unknown?
Yeah, absolutely. We recognize that getting answers for other funding is quite difficult sometimes, and we don't want to ask you to wait for that information before you apply. In the budget template, there's an option to mark your funding as confirmed or unconfirmed. So you can mark that funding as unconfirmed. And then it's also helpful in the note section if you note when you expect to receive a decision on that funding. But to sum up, yes, you can still apply for staffing costs, even if you haven't heard back about staffing from a different funder.
Okay, I was just about to say there was no further questions, but there is one additional question in the chat. Okay. Which would be, would funding be considered, or would it be eligible if there was a one-day event?
That's a good question. Yes, one-day events are still eligible through the stream.
That was our last question in the chat, so I guess we'll just make a last-minute call for any additional questions in the chat. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anna Maria and Roxanne. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Those were all great points of clarification. And this is new for both of us, for the Winnipeg Foundation and for grantees. So I appreciate your curiosity and your willingness to learn about this program as we build it. As I said, if you have questions that you feel are specific to your organization or that would require a more fulsome discussion, or you have a question that you think of as soon as you log off, which tends to be the case, please feel free to reach out. You can reach us at 204-944-9474 or at grants@wpgfdn.org. Both of those lines will get you to our general contact, and then from there we can find the right person to help answer your question. Okay, thank you again so much for joining us for the Children and Youth Program Grants Info Session. My name is Aaliyah, and I look forward to reviewing your applications and seeing what projects you have in store. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.